Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording from our 2023 Elul Learning Series, Entering 5784, Sustaining Our Learning in Elul, with Rabbi Elliot Dorff.
So we're going to be talking about something that a lot of people have a lot of difficulty with, and for some very good reasons. And as a matter of fact, I would be happy to hear from, well, why is it, let me put it this way, why is it that that you have difficulty? I'll say that, or why would you imagine that I would have difficulty in visiting people who are ill, especially people in hospitals? Anybody want to, let's see, how do I see people here? Just a moment.
I'll go to view at the top right and then gallery.
Gallery, there we are.
Yeah.
Okay. So does anybody want to offer a suggestion? Why is it difficult to go and visit people who are ill? Anyone? Just unmute yourself.
Well, I think I never know. I know when I do it, I never know what to say.
Good.
I don't know how to, it seems I went for a different way. I think I feel like everything I say is wrong.
Okay, good. So that's one important reason. What's another reason? We're going to get to that. I will talk about that.
It forces you to confront theirs and your own mortality.
That's right. It forces you to confront their mortality and your own, which is not something that's pleasant. Right?
Keeping your emotions in check. Yes.
You have your own emotions when you see somebody who is ill, especially somebody that's close to you. And that's not going to, revealing those emotions may not help the person who's ill. And you may feel uncomfortable revealing those emotions altogether. Good. What's another reason?
A desire to improve the situation, knowing you can't.
That's right. It's completely frustrating, right? Because you would hope to help the person, and you're not going to be able to do that. Right? Especially if you're not a physician. But if we're talking about terminally ill people, then even the physicians are not. I mean, they're able to they're able to manage the pain and suffering, and hopefully reduce that. But there's a certain feeling of frustration that's involved in all of this. Anything else?
Rabbi Annette Berman here. I had the pleasure, honor of being with my husband in his final years. Mm-hmm. I didn't find it so difficult. Maybe I would find it difficult going to a hospital, but I didn't find it.
Okay, good. Good for you. Okay. Let me just say one other piece of this, which is the schlep of it all, right? In other words, you're not going to see the person in the usual places you see the person, right? So you're going to have to put it in your calendar to remember to go to visit the person. And then I've been on the ethics committee at UCLA Medical Center since the mid-1980s. I still have not figured out how they number rooms, but let's say you finally get to the room where you have to pay for parking, right? And then you have to, when you finally get to the room, what's likely to be the case?
They're sleeping.
They're sleeping, or they are out for tests. And neither one of those things is going to encourage you to come back, right? So there are all these factors that are very, that make it an uncomfortable situation. I can't help you with paying for parking, but let me start with some things that are very important in regard to this. So the first thing in terms of visiting the sick, as you know, is that it is a mitzvah, and the reason why visiting the sick is a mitzvah is because one aspect of illness. I'm going to be talking about several aspects of illness. One aspect of illness is that it's isolating. And now I'm going to quote you an ancient Jewish source: people who need people are the luckiest people in the world. No, Barbara Streisand is just a few years older than I am, but I'm ancient, so I guess she is too. but people have a real need for being in touch with other people. We certainly saw that during COVID. And the Surgeon General has come out with a statement that loneliness is a national illness at the moment, right? And so, I mean, and the very worst situations, aside from execution and torture, the harshest penalty in a prison environment is solitary confinement. And unfortunately, we know that people who are held in solitary confinement for long periods of time often go insane. So we really have an important need to be with other people. So illness, first of all, is isolating, and that's an important reason why the tradition sees it as a commandment to do it, despite all these reasons that we just talked about as to why you don't really want to. Second thing is, well, how do you deal with it? You know, when you go in, people feel that they're not really, they don't really have the skills to do it well. Well, the first thing, and by the way, when I talk to doctors, I tell them this as well, sit down, right? Because if, I'm not going to be able to do this online, but if the patient is lying flat and you're standing up, what does that body language convey?
But you're not power issue.
That's right. You're different power things, right? You're okay. And
there's a problem with that. There's a problem with that. When you, as a physician, when you walk into a patient's room, the chair is on the other side of the patient's bed and is taken by a family member.
Yes. Well, if there are no chairs, then if you
right,
can't,
and it's not considered proper to sit on a patient's bed unless you really happen to.
Yeah, that's right. Fair enough.
That's a bad thing.
Understood, Barry. Absolutely right. If there are no chairs there, you can't sit. Although, interestingly, Maimonides talks about this. And in his time, there were no raised beds. So people slept on mattresses or mats on the ground. And Maimonides, who himself was a physician, says that what you need to do is come and lie down on the floor so that your head is not higher than the patient's head. Right. The point being that because the second aspect of illness is that it's debilitating, and you don't want anything that you do to reinforce the sense that the person has lost abilities. Right. So so if there is a chair there, then sit down so that you are more or less on the same level. Then now the third thing, the thing that Bob mentioned before, what do you talk about? Let me just tell you that both patients and their visitors get sick of talking about the weather and the food in about 3 seconds, maybe more than 3 seconds, but 3 minutes. Okay. So what do you talk about? I learned this the year after I finished rabbinical school. I was working on my doctorate at Columbia, and I was asked by 2 social workers to do 3 sessions on Jewish theology at the Jewish Home for the Aged. This was in Manhattan. And the social workers met with me before I was going to do these sessions, and they taught me some things about what people are like and later on in life. And one of the things they taught me was that body language changes as one gets older. So that, as a matter of fact, during one of the sessions, there was a man who had been a dentist, and he had his eyes closed through the entire session. And then he raised his hand, and it was clear that he had heard absolutely everything that had gone on. So normally, with most of my students, I would assume they had fallen asleep if their eyes were closed during a session, right? But that was clearly not the case in this case. And then I finally, and they had me select readings for these people, and they blew up the readings so that they were in very large print so people could read them ahead of time. And by the way, these people were really well prepared. I'm not saying that my students are not normally, but these people were really well prepared for class. So I finally asked these social workers, why of all things do you want me to do 3 sessions on Jewish theology for this group? And so one of them said, because they're sick of bingo, right? These are people who are intellectually alive. Their bodies are not working so well, but their minds are still working well. Obviously, if that's not the case, then it's a whole different story, right? And they want, many of them were college educated, and they want intellectual stimulation. Because another piece of illness is that it's not only debilitating, but it's infantilizing, right? You're not able to do the kinds of things that you were normally able to do as an adult. And so what they taught me is that what you want to do is, you don't have to talk about Jewish theology with the people that you visit, but what you want to do is talk about the same sorts of adult topics that you would normally talk about if the person were well, right? So if that's, I don't know, politics, then talk politics, or literature, or movies, or show business, or sports, whatever it is you normally talk about with those people. Talk about those things, because what is the subtext? If you're talking about the exact same kinds of things to this person that you would normally talk about if the person were well, what is the subtext of that? What are you saying to the person?
You're okay.
Yes, you're okay. You're still an adult in terms of how you think and in terms of how I want to interact with you. I still respect you as an adult, because this is the opposite of, again, illness being infantilizing. This is giving people a sense that their opinion still matters, and that it's important to interact on that kind of a level. So illness is isolating, it's debilitating, and it's infantilizing. And finally, most of us are not going to die of an acute illness. And some of us will, a sudden heart attack and you're gone, or a car accident and you're gone, that kind of thing, right? But the vast majority of us are going to die of chronic illnesses. That is, things that last over a long period of time. So the fourth aspect of illness is that it's boring, right? I mean, there's a limit to what you can do and to continue to keep life interesting at all. So one of the things that our tradition created, that I would at least suggest to you, especially when dealing with somebody who has a chronic illness, is this thing called an ethical will. It comes out of the Middle Ages, and originally it was a letter that a parent would write to his or her, presumably adult children, talking about the values that that person at least tried to live by. Hence, it's called an ethical will, right? But it doesn't have to be, first of all, it doesn't have to be a letter, and now it can be any form of recording that is available. And it often can, and it can be what kinds of values did you try to live by, but it can also be the family history. And you can, if somebody's coming and helping you record the family history, that's a reason to get up in the morning, because, and by the way, I unfortunately didn't think to do this when my parents were alive, but I did it with Marlon's parents. I took at that time a videotape thing, and Marlon didn't want to do this at all because she said she had heard all these stories before, right? But I had not heard the stories. So all you do is I think I started with my father-in-law and then my mother-in-law, or the other way around. And all you do is just start from the beginning. What are your earliest memories? Who was around at the time? Aunts, uncles, cousins, all of that, right? Where did you go to school, and what was that like? And if you came to this country, when was that? And what was that like? And how did you choose a profession? And did you like doing the kinds of things that you did? Did you meet somebody? And if so, how did that happen? And so on down the line, right? All you do is just sort of lead people into telling their story. Now, it doesn't have to be immensely articulate, because this is not for public consumption. This is for the family. And even if the children don't want to listen to these stories anymore, the grandchildren really do. Really, really want to know, right? So you're effectively helping this person leave a legacy of the family story, basically. And that's a reason to get up in the morning if somebody's going to come and help you do that. It's a very, so that can be part of this kind of ethical will that you help people create if they have chronic illness. The other kind of thing that I think is important in terms of this is that you keep people you get people involved, people who have chronic illnesses and they're not going to get better, but who are still mentally okay. You challenge them mentally. I mean, again, it doesn't have to be Jewish theology. It can be whatever you're interested in and what that person is interested in, and challenge them, right? I mean, if anything is true about the Jewish tradition, it is that, and by the way, I do a lot of interfaith work, very different from a lot of other traditions. So, for example, for many years, I did a program for the Anti-Defamation League for teachers in Catholic high schools, most of whom themselves were Catholic. And the priest with whom I do this said to his fellow Catholics, we Catholics are good at reception. We receive what we are told. At which point I tell them Jews are terrible at reception, right? We question everything, okay? Well, use that cultural feature of our culture to engage in a debate. Well, I wouldn't say a debate, that's a little bit too strong, but at least in a conversation about things that are problematic. And of course, there are many things in life that are problematic these days, in America, in Israel, all over the world, right? And use that to engage people so they have to really think through things and challenge you and be challenged by you, because that helps to keep the brain cells going, and it also reinforces the fact that this person is an adult and that you really respect that person's opinion to the point that you're willing to challenge it, right? So I think those kinds of things I think are really important in terms of visiting the set. Another piece of this I think that's important is that if you can, call ahead of time to make sure that the person is open to having visitors and is not going to be out for tests. And so that when you get there, that's good for both of you, because so then when you get there, the person will be there and expecting you. And it may be that, the person, the particular time that you wanted to come is a time when the person usually takes a nap. So it may not be an opportune time for you to come, right? So if you can call ahead of time and make sure that it is a time when the person wants to engage with you, then that would be just as a matter of respect, but also for the pragmatic reason that way you'll actually be able to engage with the person. That kind of thing is, I think, really important. Another piece of this that I think you have to be aware of is that people who have terminal illnesses, especially chronic illnesses, it varies a lot by illness, and I'm not a physician, but I've been around physicians for a long time. And one of the things that I think you need to be aware of is that very often people do not deteriorate in one step down. It often is, they deteriorate in one way, and then they're on a plateau for a while, and then they deteriorate a little bit more, and they're on a plateau for a while, right? So, I mean, expect the fact that the way you saw the person last time may be exactly the way you see the person this time, but it may also be a little bit less good than the way that you saw the person last time. If you expect that, then hopefully your face will not show the kind of pain that you feel in seeing the person as being further diminished. And you'll just understand that this is the nature of life, and that this is something. Then what you need to do is get to engage the person wherever that person is, in that person's level of ability and disability, and just work with the person at that level. I'm going to talk a little bit about the purpose of these sessions is how we support each other. The other piece of this is that you don't have to do this alone, right? You can do this with other people. You can set up, not only can, but maybe should, set up a kind of rotation of people who are going to be doing this with a given family member or a given friend. So the burden of this is not on one person, but is rather shared. That's like a Bikur Cholim society in the synagogue, right, where people are trained to visit people who are ill and who take on the responsibility to do this. Because you don't have to be a really close family member or a close friend to help somebody to visit somebody who is ill. But you need to be able to know how to engage people in these kinds of situations. A little bit about the medicine, and just a little bit about it, because every patient is different and every situation is different. There will be times probably when the patient is going to be very frustrated and very, very worried. You need to be able to hear that. And to be able to hear that means that you don't say, oh, it'll be fine, right? Because it probably won't be fine if we're talking about the kinds of cases that we're talking about, right? By the way, if you're talking about different kinds of illnesses, if you're talking about visiting people who are ill, maybe even at home, right, and they are going to get better, then one of the things you want to do is help them with practical matters, like the carpool, if that's an issue, or feeding the family, if that's an issue, right? You want to be able to help them with some of the pragmatic matter. As a matter of fact, in the Shulchan Aruch, one of the codes of Jewish law, one of the things you're supposed to do is to make sure that the person has filled out a will for the disposition of the person's property. And the way that the Shulchan Aruch puts it is, you're supposed to say, you're going to live to 120. But in case you don't live to 120, how do you want your property disposed of, right? Or, disseminate. Now, for many people, that's done long before they get really ill, but it may not be the case. And so you may want to do that, right? If you don't think that the person has done that. More likely, the person has not filled out a durable power of attorney for healthcare. And you really want to help people do that. A durable power of attorney for healthcare consists of two things. It consists of a proxy statement, that is, if I am not able, it would start out by, I am now of sound mind, but in case I am not able to determine what kind of healthcare interventions I want to appoint person number one as being my surrogate decision maker. And if person number one is not either available or willing to do it, then number two, if not number two, number three, with the contact information. And then the second part is sometimes called a living will, but basically it takes you through, there are different kinds of these things. The California Medical Association has one. Each of the movements of Judaism has one. And interestingly, it really reflects the legal ideologies of each of the movements. And the Orthodox, and the one from the Rabbinical Council of America, the Modern Orthodox Rabbinic Group, it basically says, my rabbi is so-and-so, consult him, right? And that's it, basically. In the Reform movement, with individual autonomy, what they have is a rubric. So down across the top is, I don't want it, I probably don't want it, I don't know, I probably want it, I definitely want it. And then down the horizontal side, the vertical side is a whole series of interventions, and the person checks whatever they want, because individual autonomy is the name of the game in the Reform movement. In the conservative movement one, it takes you through, it's based on two different responsa, that one that I wrote and one that Rabbi Avram Reisner wrote back in 1990. We agree on about 85 or 90% of the issues, but disagree on some of the issues. And so what the advanced directive does is it takes you through, nobody knows how they're going to die and what the issues are, but it takes you through 10 scenarios that are very common, where you have to make a decision as to whether you want this or you don't want this. And so actually, I had to help my mother-in-law remove life support from my father-in-law when it really needed to be done. But she felt very guilty about all of this. So I helped her fill out the conservative movement's durable power of attorney. So at the beginning, she said, "Well, I want everything." So I went through intervention number one, and I explained to her what it would mean. Right? She said, "Oh, I wouldn't want that." Then intervention number two, "Oh, I wouldn't want that." Right? In the end, she didn't want any of it, actually. But what she was worried about, and this is a real worry, she didn't want to feel abandoned. In other words, she was afraid that if she said that she didn't want all of these interventions, then people would just not pay attention to her at all when she was, when she was in an active stage of dying. So that is a real concern, but people need to be, several things need to happen. First of all, people need to be reassured that even if they don't ask for any of these interventions, that doesn't mean that they're going to be ignored. And the other thing is that most people who are not doctors, believe it or not, most people are not doctors, even among Jews, don't understand what these interventions are. So one of the things, by the way, we can do in the synagogue is have a session. We've done this once or twice in the past. Have a session in which a physician and a rabbi goes through each of these things in the Conservative Movements Committee and the durable power of attorney that the Conservative Movement created, just to explain. The doctor can explain what the intervention is and what the pluses and minuses are of each of these interventions, and then to enable people to understand what's being talked about, and then people can fill this out. Now, why would you fill this out? Well, California actually was the first state to have living will legislation back in 1973. And now all 50 states have something like that. And the American reason for doing that is so that, you can determine the course of your medical treatment, even when you are mentally unable to do that, right? Individual liberty is at the core of the American way of looking at medical care altogether, and all kinds of other things as well. The problem is that these documents rarely work that way, because when somebody is not able to determine what should happen next in terms of their healthcare status, doctors are going to look to the family members, because for several reasons. Number one, hopefully the family members will know what this family member would have wanted, right? But in addition to that, when the person dies, that person is not going to sue the doctor, but family members might, and doctors may even win in court, but they don't want to spend time in court. That's not what they're trained for, right? And they don't get paid for it, right? So they're going to want to try to make sure that the family is on board with whatever is going to happen. And if the family doesn't agree, then they will they'll try mediation of various sorts and all of that, right? But then they will ultimately have to get a court order to do whatever it is that they need to do. But they really want to avoid all of that, right? So what I'm trying to say is again, I've been dealing with this on the ethics committee at UCLA Medical Center for 35 years now, actually close to 40, and every time we've had one of these cases, it's been because the family is not in sync with each other or with the doctors as to what would be medically appropriate. And our job in those situations is to try to bring some agreement as to what happens. And sometimes we succeed and sometimes not. But it's the only time that this advanced directive really governs what happens is if there are no family members or no friends around, right? In other words, there is a document on record, but nobody else knows the person in any way, right? Or where the family members themselves are really conflicted, in which case the doctors will go to court in order to enforce the advance directive. There's a Jewish reason to do this, though. The Jewish reason to fill out an advance directive is so that your children will talk to each other after you die. I've actually seen some of these cases. 3 adult children, 2 of them agree that it's appropriate to withdraw life support from mom, let's say. One of them specifically says no. And I actually heard a case like this where the daughter said, Mom and I did not get along very well during our lifetime together, but in the end, I was there for her and you guys killed her, she said to her siblings, right? You want to avoid that, okay? You want to avoid that kind of family interaction. And, they may not get along with each other after you die for all kinds of other reasons, but you don't want this to be yet another reason why they don't talk to each other, right? I actually know of a family who took all of the adult children and the grandchildren and the children-in-law to Cancun for a week on condition that on Tuesday afternoon, all of the adults would be together so that, and they were handed the advance directives of both the man and the woman in the couple, right? And they went through it because people don't like to talk about the end of life. And they certainly don't like to talk about the end of life of somebody that's really close to them or themselves. But Jews know how to deal with the text, right? So if you hand out a text, namely the advance directive, you can go down, each piece of the text, and each member of the couple then explained what they wanted, what they didn't want. And so whoever was the surrogate decision maker could rightfully say, well, you were there when mom and dad told us what they wanted. This may not be what I want when I die, but this is what they said they wanted. And so all I'm doing is carrying out their own wishes that you all heard, right? Now, you don't have to go to Cancun to do this, okay? But I think it is really important not only to fill out an advance directive, but to make sure that your loved ones know about it. And I've heard you, and better that, if it's at all possible, better that they not just read it, but they go through it with you and hear what what you have written is not just something that you didn't understand, but that you really understand what you're choosing, and that and they should hear it from your mouth, as it were, if at all possible, as well as in the written document. So that's another thing, that if the person has not filled out an advance directive for healthcare, that would be a really important thing to help the person do while that person is mentally competent, because it's going to be good for themselves. It's going to be good for their family members. That way, by the way, the family, unlike my mother-in-law, she really did not need to feel guilt over the decisions that were made, but she did feel guilt because she had never talked about this with her husband, right? So this is a way to alleviate, or actually to avoid any sense of guilt. It's also a way to make sure that the surviving family members don't argue about this issue. I want to mention one last thing, and then I'll be happy to take whatever questions you have. In the end, the Jewish tradition is really in conflict over these things, because the Jewish tradition is very supportive of medicine. This goes back to the Torah itself, in the very first legal code in the Torah in Exodus. If somebody assaults somebody else, the person has to provide for the time lost from that person's job while healing, and he must surely heal him. That is, he has to provide medical care for the person. This was the Exodus law code written around 1000 before the Common Era, when medicine was not really all that good. But even then, there was a sense that medicine had to be used. All the more so during the Middle Ages, there were all kinds of rabbis who were also physicians. I mean, Maimonides is the one that everybody thinks about, but there were a lot of them that were both rabbis and physicians. That doesn't happen very much anymore because it still takes more or less the same amount of time to go to rabbinical school, but it takes much, much longer to go through, become a doctor. I actually was at a conference at the University of Virginia Medical Center, and the dean said, in Mr. Jefferson's medical school, how long do you think it took to become a doctor? Any guess?
3 years. 2 years?
1 year. Because in the 1700s, that's all they could teach you. Right? Now it's 4 years of pre-med and 4 years of medical school and a year of internship and 3 years of residency and postdocs and all of that, right? Simply because the knowledge of medicine has exploded over the last 200 years, especially over the last 100 years, and even more over the last 50 years in terms exponentially. So there's just much more to learn. So there are a number of PhD rabbis like me, but there are very few MD rabbis. Avi Chavivi is one, but there are very few MD rabbis these days, right? Just because it takes so long to become trained as a doctor. But the thing is that one needs to understand that on the one hand, the Jewish tradition has been very aggressive in terms of the need to try to use medicine to the fullest. But on the other hand, starting with the Garden of Eden story, it's a mythic way of explaining the fact that we understand that we are mortal, right? Adam and Eve were allowed to eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. That's just a mythic way of saying that human beings understand moral distinctions and are able to live by them, but we're not able to eat of the fruit of the tree of life because we are not immortal. Okay? Later on, Ecclesiastes will say there is a time to be born and a time to die. Right? So there's on the one hand, a really aggressive stance in terms of the use of medicine in our tradition. And on the other hand, there's an acceptance of the fact that at some point we die. And so I was on the very first hospice commission, Jewish hospice commission, called together by Rabbi Maurice Lamb, who was the rabbi at Beth Jacob at the time, right, an Orthodox rabbi, and Rabbi Bill Cutter and I, the Orthodox Conservative Reform, were part of this, and a number of physicians were part of it as well. But it was 1983 when the Jewish Hospice Commission first came into being in Los Angeles, and basically what we were trying to do is to create educational materials for Jews to understand how to balance these two different parts of our tradition, right? When is it the case that we should really be aggressive in terms of whatever medical care we seek and administer, and when should hospice care, that is comfort care, be applied instead, right? And you need to know that there are times there is really, as much as medicine has expanded in its ability to help us live and live well, as much as that's happened, in the end we are still mortal, and at some point it is appropriate to use hospice care. Hospice care includes a lot of visits from family and friends. It's as a matter of fact, hospice care can take place in the home. If you remember, Jackie Kennedy left the hospital so she could die at home, because then you're going to be among family and friends in familiar surroundings, as opposed to a hospital bed where you don't know anybody, right? So you need to understand that hospice care may be appropriate at some point, and don't see that as a failure of courage or a failure of effort or a failure of any sort. It is just the appropriate way to help people at that stage in life. Okay, I see Barbara has her hand up. Go ahead.
Before Barbara asks her question, and then I'm happy to go to her. I just want to make one mention, because this is part of the reason that we asked Rabbi Dorff to do this tonight. We are, as many of you have probably heard, or you'll hear definitely a lot about over the high holidays, our theme for this year is Mechaye HaKol, so sustaining community, and it's a play on the idea that our Reform colleagues use Mechaye HaKol instead of Mechaye HaMeitim to really focus on the life ahead as opposed to bringing back life that is no longer with us. And part of the reason we chose that theme is because we really want to put our efforts into talking about what does it mean to live life in 5784, to build up our Chevra Kadisha, to build up programs around focusing on from visiting someone who is sick to the death and dying process, as well as just focusing on life through recognizing that that means having conversations about death. So this was the first of many conversations, and a whole series is coming your way after Simchat Torah through Hanukkah that'll be all about writing these advanced directives, talking about ethical wills, going and visiting mortuaries, having training for Chevra Kadisha if you're interested in being part of that initiative between us and IKAR, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this was a brilliant taste, but simply a taste of what is to come, both from Rabbi Dorff, also Ariel Friedtanzer is on here this evening. She will also be teaching, and many other people in our community and in this field, so that we can really amp up what it means to be living with an eye towards what it also means to be allowing for life once we are gone. So I just wanted to point that out. And now any questions? Barbara, go ahead.
Hi. Elliot, since you're on the committee at the ethics committee at in UCLA, one of the things that's always bothered me as a physician is that when a person enters the hospital, and I don't know at what age they start doing it, if there is an age, but they certainly don't do it for kids. They always ask, do you have an advance directive?
Right.
Now, what good is that? It's useless, because they don't ask. I believe that they should ask for copies of the advance directive. I mean, everybody's got it. It's sitting in my file cabinet here. Because if anything happens, the hospital knows, oh, there's an advance directive. They don't know when they should pull the plug. If something happens in the OR that's critical, they don't know, should they continue saving that life or should they let it go? They have no idea. And I personally would love it if UCLA could get it going, maybe other hospitals would, because I think it's a failure on the part of hospitals that they don't know what the person wants. It doesn't help them to know that there's an advance directive.
Right.
Because, when there's an emergency situation, that emergency situation requires having it on hand, not in your file cabinet at home.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. And I honestly don't know what the procedure at UCLA is now in terms of this, but I mean, I do know that they have medical social workers that talk with patients to try to make sure that they have an advance directive and that they know what it is. In other words, that the doctors know what it is. Again, I'm not really current about this, but thank you for asking. I will find out. Okay, I will find out what UCLA does about this kind of stuff. Tanya, what does City of Hope do on this stuff?
I think the question of do you have an advance directive is really intended to open the conversation to say, please bring it in. We want to have it on file, because you're right. When things are in crisis mode, you don't want to be scrambling to look for it. So right. City of Hope's been having an initiative for some years. How successful it is questionable, but to have every patient have an advance directive, but I think it's hard to make an advance directive when you're healthy that makes sense. What things you'd be willing to go through might be different when you're 40 and healthy than when you're right. 40 and have a terminal illness, or 70 and have a terminal illness, just as things change. So I think some people are actually scared to turn in their advance directive because it feels so final.
Right. Yeah. And the original legislation back in 1973 in California required that it be renewed every 3 years. Because exactly right. Whatever you say at age 40 may be different than what you say at age 70, or different what you say at age 80, right? Or different once you have an illness that you didn't have before, and you're now really experiencing it. And so now maybe what you would want is different from when you had no clue as to what this was going to feel like, right? So, I mean, that's one of the problems with advance directives, right? Namely, is this really a reflection of what the person would want under these conditions? It's important not only that there be an advance directive, but that it be current. And I really don't know what UCLA does with that, but I will try to find out.
Okay, I'm gonna call people in order because there's a lot of you that have questions. So I'm gonna do this in order and remember your number. Okay, Bonnie, and then Helen, and then Roseanne, and then Lillian, and then Mike, and then Mitch. You might have a question. You unmuted, so I assume you have a question. So let's go in that order. Bonnie first.
Rebecca, I have a question. Dr. Schatz, I'm responding to Elliot's question about what does UCLA do, so I can wait my turn. Or if Elliot like.
Go ahead. Okay, Bonnie, hold on.
Okay, sorry about that. So, Elliot, do you want me to say what UCLA?
By all means, please do. Yeah.
Okay, so it really varies a lot, and I agree with Tanya. It varies a lot how we do it. In primary care, we actually have a reminder to start to do it every 5 years and to update it. Now, and so in primary care, it really varies depending on the physician. You know, I'm very committed to doing this. Elliot and I are on the ethics committee together, which has been a great honor for 30 Elliot. And so, you know, it's inculcated in my soul at this point to do it every year. But I think it depends on the time that the primary care providers have. I think it depends on the specialty. And you're right, Barbara, we do a temporary advanced care directive when somebody is admitted to the hospital. But that's an awkward time to do it, and we all know it. It's a very awkward time. And we try to get these discussions going early on when people are young, and then to update it, because as Elliot said, things change a lot depending on, you know, your goals and objectives for life when you're in your 30s are very different than you maybe are in your 70s or 80s, where every year is precious.
Good. Thank you.
Thanks, Lillian. All right, Bonnie.
Okay, so two things. One is that I had an experience at UCLA that was not our hospital because we were at Kaiser, but it was an emergency. Larry had this hemorrhagic stroke, and the girls drove whatever they could. But what ended up happening was that they explained this horrendous surgery that maybe they could do or would do, and removing skulls and whatever bad stuff, and that he wouldn't have quality of life. My son-in-law down in San Diego, he had a copy. I have one at home, but I was up at UCLA, and he read it to the emergency physicians over the phone, and so we were able to not have to have any of the heavy-duty stuff. So that was my experience with that. But my second thought is that for years ago, I was on a committee at Beth Am with Rabbi Howard on a Bikur Cholim committee where we did visiting. And she put me in touch with, at that time, Santa Monica Hospital that was later bought up by UCLA. And I trained there, and I have been visiting palliative care patients there for almost 20 years.
Wow.
And so it is interesting to see who has what and how much easier it is when you have these things in place before you're ill. But also the difference between palliative and hospice is important for people to know too, because we have chronic patients like sickle cell anemia people, or what's the long one? I can't think of it. But anyway, so that's an interesting thing. Lots of times they go on hospice, but I would be happy to talk with anybody about what kinds of things I do when I visit these patients. And they run the gamut from all kinds of, from 20-year-olds to 80-year-olds, and from people who come from Dubai or from Darwin, California, which is in the middle of nowhere, and all kinds of religions. And it's a very interesting work. So I'd be happy to talk about that.
Yeah, the cultural part that Bonnie was just talking about is really important, because part of, I've been talking about what you talk about to Jews who come in this culture, but people who were raised in different cultures really want different things and expect different things. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention is that the Shulchan Aruch says you haven't fulfilled the responsibility to visit the sick unless you pray with the person, which then leads to, all kinds of questions about, well, what is it that you're praying for, right? And one can pray for relief of symptoms. One can pray for being able to see somebody that you haven't seen in a long time. One can pray for reconciliation with family members or people that used to be friends, right? I mean, even if one cannot reasonably pray for a cure of the disease, right? One of the people on the hospice commission back in the 80s was Larry Heifetz, who was an oncologist at Cedars, and he did brain cancer. And at the time, he said, most of the cancers that I see, I cannot cure, but I can care, right? And that's the reason why he got involved in the hospice commission. So, I mean, the cultural sensitivities that Bonnie was just talking about are really important if you're talking about visiting people that are not part of our own culture.
Okay, Helen.
Okay. I just wanted to say that I was a gerontologist by training, and I did a lot of educational lectures related to these issues. And my husband and I had, when we did a trust, when we updated our trust, we did a durable power of attorney for healthcare. And we put our children in to speak for us. And I'm looking at my husband and I said, you do know that Faye will not have a problem pulling the plug and Steve will not be able to do it. And I said, you have to sit down and talk to them because this is, I mean, I was making a joke of it because at that time it was much easier. And, we sat down and my son's first comment was, Faye's on it, isn't she? She's going to be there to be called because she's the big sister. And talking about it is the most critical thing. Talking to your family about it, talking to the people who are going to make the decision, it helps them become comfortable. They don't like it. That's not what I mean, but it helps them be able to address the issue. And I think that's really one of the most important things that you were addressing before.
Right.
And if you're a patient through UCLA, my primary care doctor she asked for our durable powers of attorney for healthcare many, many years ago. And in the emergency room, the residents looked at my husband and said, Mr. Wax, we ask everyone, you filled out your durable power of attorney and you made these decisions. Do you still go by them? And he said, yes, I am very comfortable with the decision I made. Of course, I was not at that point because he said, pull the plug, don't do anything. And I said, but he was very comfortable with it and it worked out for him the way he had wanted it. But the price on the family, whether or not they're getting along, it's having the person be very clear about it is the most important thing, I think.
Yeah.
I wanted to just, impart that.
Right.
Thank you.
It relieves a lot of guilt afterward. Yep.
Roseanne.
Yes, this is so interesting and so relevant. Getting back to visiting and talking to ill people, it reminded me of my late mother had a best friend and my mother died at 100, and she had a best friend since high school. They were both in their 90s at the time, and the best friend got dementia. It wasn't necessarily severe, but Frida was her name, and I loved Frida too. She was like an aunt to me, but Frida would talk in loops. She would repeat herself or ask a question repeatedly. It didn't bother me as much, but my mother couldn't stand it. because she said it was so painful for her to see Frida in that state that she wanted to avoid going to visit her, or she would want to take her to a movie or do something where there would be less circular talking. So, and then I have one other little thing, but maybe Rabbi Dorff, you could speak to that, visiting people who have dementia.
That's right. As I mentioned earlier, when the case that the series of talks that I gave to the people at the Jewish Home for the Aged were to people who were mentally fine, even though physically they were not. Now, obviously, it's a whole different story if you're talking about people who are not mentally fine. And then it really depends upon what the situation is, and it really varies a lot from one to another. I'm actually working on a rabbinic ruling right now that was brought to me first by Rabbi Laura Geller, and she and I worked on an article about this about 6 years ago, and then one of my college friends who has been married to the same woman for decades, but she no longer recognizes him or their children, right? And the question then becomes, and this has been true for about 10 years now, and the question becomes, it's not good for a person to live alone, right? Should there be some way of, and by the way, he's supporting Medicare Plus. This friend of mine are financially supporting the wife in memory care, in a memory care facility, right? But both of his adult children said that he really needs to find somebody to give him companionship. And he has. He found a widow, and they are friends, and they want to get married, but he doesn't want to divorce his wife, right? So what do you do with that, right? I mean, 10 commandments, do not commit adultery, right? What I'm arguing, and tomorrow we have an ethics committee meeting at the ethics subcommittee of the law committees, which will give me my first feedback on this, and I'm going to be yelled at. I know already. Okay. But what I'm arguing is that the laws of adultery can only understood and understandably be applied, or plausibly be applied, to people who are all mentally competent.
Right.
But if somebody is not mentally competent, then that's not that the laws of adultery cannot really apply to that kind of situation. So that's what I'm arguing. Who knows whether it'll fly or not, but we'll see what happens.
Roseanne, just because it's already 8:30, I'm going to call on the two other people, and then if we have time, we'll come back.
This is not a question. It's something I want to very quickly mention. There's a very important article that I recently read. I didn't know about this session tonight, or I would have, but either in the New Yorker, the New York Times, or the Washington Post, it was a doctor writing about CPR.
Mm-hmm.
And how destructive and dangerous it is, and how not like the television shows where they bring somebody back to life and the person is the same. I strongly recommend that everybody read it before they fill out or adjust their advanced medical directive. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, Mike.
Yes. Thank you, Rabbi Dorff. And I just wanted to emphasize, and maybe Rabbi Dorff could do this as well, that even if there are advanced directives and durable powers of attorney, there can always, depending on circumstances that can change from day to day or week to week, there can be there is so many situations where clergy, or I would say the social workers, pastoral workers in that field, are needed to interface with the family on different occasions that can change. And it's so important. I mean, I can see why hospitals are, I'm a retired pediatrician, but hospitals are putting a lot of effort into their chaplaincy services increasingly, and it's such an important part of training and important part of interfacing with the family, even in hospice situations now. And I think in the hospice situation, because that area has been developed so much more in recent years, it's better. But maybe you could speak to the necessity of trained professionals.
Absolutely. And as a matter of fact, part of the rabbinic training is that they get at least some training in terms of hospital work. Some people do much more. They actually get some of these units that you need to get in order to be certified as a chaplain, right? A few of our rabbinical students have done that, but all of them get at least some training in terms of how do you help people who are hospitalized. And you're absolutely right. I mean, it's life, even toward its end, is a dynamic thing. It changes hourly, daily, hourly, that kind of thing, right? And exactly what is appropriate depends upon the current circumstances, right? And that's very often hard to catch and hard to discern, and therefore hard to know how to deal with. But with training, you can at least do it better. Yeah.
Okay, Mitch, I think you're our last comment question.
Hi. If I'm one of many siblings and I'm very thoughtful about these kinds of things, how do I speak to my terminally ill parent about his or her will without appearing to my siblings and without appearing to my parent as if I'm the greedy child when I ask to do their will?
Have they created a will already?
No.
Oh, they haven't created a will.
Right.
Oh, dear. Well, then I think in order to preserve to avoid that impression by either your parents or your siblings, get your siblings together to talk to your parents, all of you together, to say to your parents, you need to create a will for the disposition of your property. We're not going to intervene in that. You need to do that. We'll get you, professional help to do that. But we as your children, not just you as one child, but we as your children want you to fill out some kind of whatever your will is for that. Which could, by the way, if you talk to estate attorneys, they will probably tell you that you're better off not with a will that will have to then go through probate, but rather through a living trust and things like that. But all of that needs to be done while they are mentally competent. And so in any case, I mean, what I would say to you is, in order to preserve good relations with your siblings, get them all together, and all of you together should tell your parents, now, if you haven't done it until now is really important. And we can even provide you, we will pay for the estate attorney that will help you do this.
Very good. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Mitch. That was an important last question.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.